The SNES wasn't just a cute 16-bit box. It was a war machine for run-and-gun chaos. From the second that crunchy soundtrack kicks in and the first explosion pops off, I'm locked in, thumbs cramping, and grinning like an idiot. These games don't ease you in. They shove you straight into bullet hell with screaming guitars, gigantic bosses, and zero chill. So in this video, I've got you 10 ultra-explosive SNES titles that prove this console wasn't just about Mario and Zelda. It was a true powerhouse for pure, sweaty-palmed arcade action. In the meantime, comment your favorite explosive action game.
Arm your assault suit. French hot. Missile.
Super Turrican 2. When I play Super Turrican 2, it feels like the SNES is screaming, yeah, I've still got it. This 1995 run-and-gun was developed by Factor 5 and released on the Super Nintendo, with later re-releases on Wii Virtual Console and modern Turrican collections. But it originally slipped under a lot of radars because it came so late in the console's life. The game trades the open, maze-like levels of older Turrican entries for more focused, Contra-style stages. And honestly, that tighter pacing makes every moment feel explosive. You're constantly swapping between different shot types, swinging over gaps with a grappling arm, hopping into vehicles like a dune buggy or a space bike, and watching the screen light up with Mode 7 effects and huge explosions. On top of that, Chris Hulsbeck's soundtrack is pure 16-bit blockbuster, with big cinematic tracks that make every set piece feel like a final battle. If you love high-intensity action, technical showpieces, and that late-era SNES "we're going all in" energy, this is one absolutely worth hunting down. Pocky and Rocky. I'll be honest, Pocky and Rocky looks cute, but it absolutely does not play around. Released in 1992 for the Super Nintendo and developed by Natsume as a sequel to Taito's arcade game Kiki Kai Kai, it's a top-down run-and-gun where you play as a shrine maiden and her tanuki buddy blasting yokai in mythic Japan. The game's chibi visuals, colorful stages, and goofy bosses make it feel warm and nostalgic, but the difficulty hits that old-school sweet spot. Tough, but fair if you respect enemy patterns and use your tools. You're constantly choosing between ranged shots, cards or leaves, melee smacks, and special moves like Pocky's spin attack or Rocky's statue defense, which makes the combat feel surprisingly tactical for such a simple setup. Couch co-op is where it really shines. Two players weaving through bullet patterns together turns every stage into controlled chaos. A lot of people overlook this one because it doesn't look hardcore, but if you're into arcade-style challenge, tight controls, and some of the most charming aesthetics on the SNES, this is a must-play. Cybernator. Cybernator is that game where the moment you fire your mech's cannon, you feel the weight of the whole war behind it. Released for the SNES in 1992, this side-scrolling mecha action game, known in Japan as Assault Suits Valken, was developed by Messiah and localized, and published by Konami in the West. You play as Jake Bryan, piloting a giant assault suit in a future where Earth's dwindling fossil fuels have kicked off a full-scale global conflict. And that gritty, grounded sci-fi tone really comes through in the mission briefings and bleak backdrops. On the gameplay side, it mixes methodical platforming with heavy combat. You've got a machine gun, punch, and upgradable weapons, plus a limited jetpack that turns vertical layouts into tense little puzzles. Some stages even switch into scrolling shooter sections, forcing you to adapt your movement and aim on the fly. It's not as fast as Contra, but that's the point. Every step and every shot feels deliberate, like you're actually piloting a war machine. If you're into mechs, darker stories, and chunky SNES sound and explosions, Cybernator hits way harder than its cult status suggests. Contra III: The Alien Wars. This is part of the list where things just go completely off the rail. In the best way possible. Contra III: The Alien Wars, developed and published by Konami for the SNES in 1992, takes everything people loved about the NES Contras and cranks it to 11. You're blasting aliens in 2636 as Bill and Lance's descendants, running through 6 stages that constantly flip styles. Classic side-scrolling chaos. Mode 7 overhead stages, motorcycle chases, and that insane moment where you're literally hanging off missiles mid-air. The core gameplay is pure run-and-gun adrenaline. Dual-wielded weapons, screen-clearing bombs, wall-climbing, and destructible scenery that makes every level feel like an 80s action movie melting down your TV. The synth-heavy soundtrack and earth-shattering explosions sell the Alien War vibe perfectly, making each boss fight feel like a final showdown. It wasn't underrated at launch, but newer players sometimes skip it thinking it's just another old Contra. In reality, it's one of the best examples of how the SNES could deliver fast, ultra-explosive action without sacrificing precision. If you want to feel what true SNES powerhouse means, this is the benchmark. Super Star Wars: Return of the Jedi. If you grew up loving Star Wars, Super Star Wars on SNES feels like jamming the whole movie into a controller and shaking until boss fights fall out. Released in 1994 as the final game in the Super Star Wars trilogy, it's an action-heavy run-and-gun platformer that loosely follows the 1983 film, with versions also hitting Game Boy and Game Gear. You're swapping between Luke, Han, Chewie, Leia, and even Wicket, each with different moves and weapons, which keeps the gameplay fresh from stage to stage. One minute, you're lightsaber flipping through corridors. The next, you're blasting stormtroopers or racing through Endor on speeder bike in Mode 7 set pieces that really show off the SNES. The music leans into John Williams' themes in chunky 16-bit form, and that alone can give you goosebumps if you're a fan. People sometimes write it off as just a movie tie-in, but under that licensing is a demanding, spectacle-driven action game that rewards pattern recognition and stubborn persistence. If you want cinematic run-and-gun with big set pieces and pure nostalgia, this one delivers. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. For me, firing up Mighty Morphin Power Rangers on SNES feels like being 7 years old again, humming the theme song before the title screen even loads. Developed by Natsume and published by Bandai in 1994, this SNES-only brawler leans into side-scrolling beat-em-up more than pure run-and-gun, but still nails that explosive, high-energy action vibe. You pick one of the 5 Rangers, punch and kick through enemy waves in human form, then morph into your powerful ranger suit and go to town with special moves and screen-clearing bombs. The game ends with giant Megazord boss fights, turning battles into slow, heavy slugfests that feel totally different from the earlier stages. It's not the hardest game on the list, and critics didn't treat it like a masterpiece, but fans still praise its crunchy combat, tight controls, and surprisingly solid music that even includes vocal samples on the title theme. If you're a retro fan who grew up with the show, or just loves simple, satisfying SNES action with style, this one is pure comfort food. Super Ghouls and Ghosts. Super Ghouls and Ghosts is a game that you'll swear you'll never touch again after dying for the 50th time. And then you boot it right back up. Released in 1991 for the SNES, this Capcom classic is a brutal action platformer where you control Arthur, the knight who loses his armor piece by piece as enemies batter him. It's not a traditional run and gun, but it's a relentless projectile dodging, constant enemy pressure, and weapon juggling scratch that same intense gameplay itch. The big mechanic here is the double jump. Once you commit to a jump and then a second mid-air, you can't steer freely, which makes every leap feel like a high-stakes decision. Levels are filled with traps, shifting platforms, rising waves, collapsing ground, and you're always tempted to chase better armor and weapons, even though they can make life harder if you choose poorly. The gloomy medieval aesthetic, eerie music, and giant monster designs give it a unique identity that's stuck with players for decades. If you love punishing games that reward pattern mastery and stubborn grit, this one will absolutely own you in the best way.
Total Carnage!
Total Carnage! Total Carnage is originally a 1992 arcade game from Midway, but its SNES port landed in 1993, bringing that twin-stick multi-directional shooting style to the living room. You play as members of the Doomsday Squad, Captain Carnage and Major Mayhem, charging through war zones to stop the unhinged General Akbu, rescue hostages, and blow up literally everything in sight. Gameplay is non-stop. You're moving and shooting in different directions, dropping bombs, hopping into vehicles, and juggling power-ups while the screen floods with enemies, explosions, and screaming civilians. It shares a lot of DNA with Smash TV, but adds scrolling stages, more varied scenarios, and a darker, war-themed tone that still has a twisted sense of humor. The SNES version doesn't match the arcade perfectly, and that's why some people overlook it. But under the compromises, there's still a wild, high-energy shooter perfect for short, intense co-op sessions. If you want pure, messy, over-the-top retro action, this is your kind of chaos. GunForce. GunForce is one of those games where you can feel the arcade-first DNA in every second. Originally developed by IREM for arcades and then brought to the SNES in 1992, it's a side-scrolling shooter that already hints at the style they'd later refine in Metal Slug. You're running through war-torn battlefields, blasting enemies, rescuing hostages, and hopping into vehicles like tanks and gun platforms that turn you into a walking turret. The movement can feel a bit stiff compared to later classics, but that tension gives the action chunky, deliberate rhythm. Every jump, every shot matters. The SNES port trims some of the arcade flair, which is why it doesn't get talked about as much, but the core is still loud, explosive, and satisfying once you adapt to its packing. Visually, it leans into grim industrial backdrops, big metallic machines, and constant explosions, backed by that gritty early 90s SNES audio that suits war games perfectly. If you're into proto-Metal Slug vibes, arcade-style scoring, and messy battlefield energy, GunForce is a cool piece of run-and-gun history that deserves more love.
Heads up!
Demolition Man. Demolition Man on SNES is one of those weird licensed games that's way more intense than you'd expect. Released around 1995 and based on the Stallone movie, the SNES version mixes styles, run-and-gun platforming, and overhead shooting sections, so it never settles into just one rhythm. You're blasting your way through futuristic police stations, underground hideouts, and high-tech facilities, constantly swapping between gunfights and more methodical platforming bits. The game throws a lot at you. Enemies from every angle, environmental hazards, and tight ammo situations that force you to play a little smarter than your typical mindless movie tie-in. Visually, it leans into darker, industrial sci-fi look, with chunky sprites and sharp explosions that make the chaos feel satisfying. Because it's tied to a specific film and came late in the SNES era, a lot of players just skipped it. But fans who did try it still talk about how surprisingly solid and varied the gameplay is. If you like your action games loud, aggressive, and a little janky in a lovable way, Demolition Man is a fun deep cut to revisit on the SNES. So yeah, that's the kind of SNES energy I'm talking about. These weren't just cartridges, they were little powerhouses that turned our TVs into battlefields, haunted worlds, and full-on sci-fi war zones. Whether you grew up with these or are just discovering them now, I hope this list reminds you why the SNES still hits so hard today. If any of these games sparked a memory, or made you want to try them, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one.